All right. So, this is the first episode of what I think is going to be a podcast series. It's kind of a little bit undefined at the moment. And we're here with Polyforms, also known as Tom. Uh,
Other way around, maybe. Tom, also known as Polyform.
maybe that would be the right way around. And I thought to start off with, maybe you could just introduce yourself. I guess anyone who's watching this maybe knows who you are, but well, tell us about yourself and your work.
Well, hopefully people know who I am if they're watching this, but or listening to this. But yeah, so my name's Tom, and I make art under the name of Polyforms, which is just kind of it's actually a relatively new sort of alias for me that I set up at the beginning of the year. So I'm actually traditionally a musician, and I kind of come from a musical background, and I've been doing that for many, many years. And so at the beginning of this year, I kind of wanted a clean slate. So I set up this sort of new identity as Polyforms. I've always done visual art on the side, but it's like never been a main kind of thing. And so I set up this identity Polyforms to sort of explore that, which has been really nice because it's like I don't have to have the baggage of the sort of old alias that I have that people might have known me under. And so as Polyforms, I kind of do quite a range of different styles, maybe, but sort of everything I do tends to have some kind of element of glitch, minimalism, kind of abstract art elements to it. There's usually those sort of three elements that kind of find their way into the art that I make.
Sure. Okay. Uh, and when did you kind of discover the let's say the new outlets for digital art, for online art? I mean, NFTs being like the thing of the moment, but also through social media, there's like much more sharing of digital art, and much more outlets for your work.
So I have quite a long and winding history with digital art. So I studied art in high school, and when it came time to do my like final portfolio piece, I really, really wanted to do computer art. I think I was a bit ahead of my time. I mean, not really ahead of my time. There was plenty of people doing computer art, but I seem to remember being the only one in my kind of class who was doing kind of digital art, graphic designy sort of stuff. And so I pitched this idea to my art teacher at the time. I was like, I want to do this digital piece, and she just was having none of it. She was an older woman, much more kind of traditional art. So I ended up having to do, I think I did like a drawing or something for my final piece, and I got terrible marks for art in the end. Um, so I sort of already started exploring digital art at that stage, and then I continued to kind of just sort of do stuff on my own, and I've quite interestingly, I've just released or like re-released a series of pieces that was some of the kind of earliest like official digital art that I'd made, maybe around 2010 kind of, that I made these pieces. I mean, I'd been sort of exploring digital art a bit before then. But there was sort of a brief moment where I kind of thought, oh, this could be kind of a cool avenue to explore. Because at that stage, I was very much sort of on the music path. But I was like, let me see if there's anything to this kind of art thing. And I had a show. It was a show that I put on this. I was doing a gig with one of my bands. And the venue that we were doing it at had this kind of really cool space. So what I said to the venue, I was like, hey, do you mind if I just like put up a bunch of art pieces and can have an exhibition? Because we were kind of a weird arty band, so it sort of fit with the vibe. And there was like a lot of interest in people looking at it, and I had sort of price tags on things, but I kind of very quickly realized like it's a pretty tricky world. It's sort of like the traditional art world. It's a tough world to get into and actually make a living kind of selling art. I mean, it's the same with music as well, but I was already kind of down the music path. So at that point, I kind of put down the digital art, not entirely, but for the most part, and sort of pursued music. And then it's kind of come up just again and again throughout the years in all these sort of music related things that I've done. So I run a music company called Elephant, where I create sort of various pieces of content around music production. And within that, I've always needed a lot of visual things to accompany what I make, whether it's like an image on a website or product design. And so I've always kind of kept that sort of visual art thing going, as like almost as like a sort of support to what I was doing. It was never the main sort of show. It was always just this little extra thing that supported all the various musical bits. And I did album art for bands that I was in. I used to do like live visual shows with the band, and I'd produce all the visuals, but it was always just kind of secondary. So then, yeah, I mean, kind of at the beginning of this year, when the whole NFT thing sort of really started popping off, I got very interested because I've kind of been into the crypto space for a while, and I just thought, hey, let me give this a go. This seems really fun. Seems really interesting. I've never really kind of committed fully to the visual art side of things. Let's just give it a go. And yeah, and here I am, just 9 months later, having loads of fun, just kind of, yeah, really enjoying getting back into that side of things.
I get the impression, for anyone watching, it's not like we know each other well or we've known each other for a long time or anything like that. But I get the impression that you're just a person who likes to make things and put them out there, right?
Yeah, very much so. What's been quite fun with this new identity of Polyforms is over the years with this other project, the musical project, I'd kind of sort of built up a bit of a brand and a style and things that people would kind of come to know and expect me for. So it was a bit more difficult to just like put something out, because I could make something that was totally different to my brand, and I wouldn't want to put it out because it's like, well, it doesn't fit, or like, how is the existing audience going to respond to this? But I've always had that where I just kind of make stuff and it's like, well, let's put it out there. And so, yeah, so with this sort of clean slate of Polyforms, it was like, I'm just going to make stuff that whatever comes out, whether it is some abstract art or glitch or whatever, and somehow it's all going to fit together in the end, hopefully.
Sure. And just let the Polyforms aesthetic kind of develop, right? Let it just take its own identity. Cool. What is it that you find in art in general and in digital art especially? What's the place that it has in your life?
I think that is definitely a very interesting question, because it's something that I've often thought about myself. On the one hand, it is, I mean, obviously we'd all love to make a living kind of doing our craft. And so there's that side of thing. But at the same time, I know that I'm doing art. And if I just wanted to make a bunch of money, I'd maybe go and, I don't know, work in a store or become some kind of business person. So there's definitely something in particular about the art that kind of goes beyond wanting to get that sort of financial feedback. It feels to me, I can't quite put a finger on it, but there is sort of like a bit of a compulsion to just make stuff and get it out there. And for me, I think it's almost kind of like it is a bit of a manifestation of the self, which is interesting with like making kind of abstract art, because it doesn't really represent anything tangible. I'm like, what do these glitches kind of really represent within me? But there's something like about this sort of glitch aesthetic in particular, because I've always been like really into sort of technology. I've always said that like really my actual strength, I'm not like particularly good at visual or music, or I'm quite good with technology, whether it is a design piece of software, a music piece of software. And so I think kind of my pull towards glitch art in particular is it's this really interesting kind of manifestation of that technology, but in a sort of weird kind of aesthetic way, where I've always been sort of fascinated by the idea of misusing tools and getting them to do things that they're not meant to do, whether that's like having a drum kit, because I'm a drummer, it's my instrument of choice, but whether that's having a drum kit and like playing on the side of the drum or hitting it with your hands instead of sticks, then to like whether that might be a lot of the visual art that I actually make with VJ software, which is not at all intended for kind of being like a compositing or generative sort of visual software. It's meant for live performance, but I kind of tweak it and bend it to my will to make these things. And so, yeah, kind of glitch, and the sort of glitch aesthetic fits quite nicely into that because it's a machine doing something that it's not supposed to, but yet it's somehow still interesting, even though it's quote unquote wrong what it's doing. Yeah, it ends up being quite interesting, and that just really fascinates me.
It's still expressing something, and your choice is still, even though it's the machine that's generating the glitches, it's the artist who's choosing what what to go for, what direction to take it in, what direction to pull it in, and then what to include in the final work, right?
Exactly. I think for me, a lot of art, and like I'll be the first one to admit that I honestly don't think I'm a particularly good artist in the sense of like give me a pen and paper and tell me to draw something, and I won't be able to draw something particularly good. But I think a large part of art, at least for me, is very much about curation. And I think what separates someone who can draw really, really well, but maybe has terrible taste, from somebody who can't draw so well, but maybe has really good taste and an eye for what looks good, what works well together, what different elements fit into a composition. That sort of curatorial aspect of combining different pieces and saying, oh, that looks kind of cool. I like how that looks together, or I like those colors. Yeah, that's kind of more of my role, I think, as an artist, is curating stuff that I think looks nice.
Yeah, it's making choices and
Exactly, yeah.
selecting and
So going back to what you said about sort of the machine is making all these mistakes, and maybe some of the mistakes that the machine is making, I think actually I don't quite like those, but others I do. And so, yeah, even though it is this sort of chaos of glitch, something cohesive comes together out of it, and you create a composition or whatever that happens to be.
cool. What are some of the tools that you use in terms of software? So you mentioned that you use like some VJ. Are you talking about VJ hardware or software or?
Software. So I've always been a like all in the box kind of person. I do love getting my hands on some knobs if I can have MIDI controllers or things like that to work with, or synthesizers. But just kind of for ease of portability and always having my setup with me, I like to work in the box. So there's kind of two main pieces of software I use: Affinity Designer, which is like an Adobe Illustrator type software, and Affinity Photo, which is like a Photoshop type software, because I just don't like the Adobe stuff and can't afford the Adobe
Don't want to pay
stuff.
for it, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So I use those sort of primarily for kind of static images and designs, so 2D stuff, but that's not moving. And then anytime I want to add some kind of movement or animation, I use a piece of software called Resolume Arena, which is a VJ software. So I probably use like 5% of what the software can do, because like most of the features are there for performing live and doing interesting things when you're performing live visuals. And all I'm doing is really just like using they've got really nice built-in effects and sort of synthesizers and processors for processing the visuals in interesting ways. And so I'm just using this like small little chunk of it to do my thing, which is fun. Yeah.
Taking a small part of it and then completely abusing it and using it for, for
Exactly,
what it was not
yeah.
intended at all.
Yeah.
Cool. I wanted you to tell us a little bit what you think is going on at the moment, like about this moment that we're living through at the moment. So you've been working as Polyforms for the last 9 months, so that's almost exactly the year 2021 to date. What's going on? How do you explain it to, I don't know, like to your family or to other people?
There's definitely something happening. That's for sure. So at first, it's been an interesting year, and having been kind of in the crypto space, not like in a really big way, but sort of in a little bit of a way, since about 2013, I've kind of seen a lot of the ebbs and flows. And there is I don't know how long you've sort of been in the crypto space or how long you've been around.
Much less.
But there's definitely these like ebbs and flows, and it kind of centers around, or historically it's centered around Bitcoin's halving cycle, where every 4 years there's this kind of big boost in price of Bitcoin first and everything else. And that seems to drive interest for other things. So in 2017, 4 years ago, like the main thing that was the big hype was ICOs, initial coin offerings, which were like these basically like stock offerings, but on the blockchain, and everyone was throwing loads of money into it. Loads of people made loads of money. Other people lost loads of money. Interestingly, though, NFTs, the first NFTs actually came about in 2017 as well. CryptoPunks, CryptoKitties, things like that. But I certainly didn't pay them much attention at the time. I know CryptoKitties was huge for a moment. And I think sort of the majority of people didn't really, because it obviously hadn't matured to a point where we could do the things that we're doing now. And so fast forward 4 years later, and obviously there's all this has sort of been bubbling up in a very kind of underground way. But I think now, again, because of this 4 year cycle, and sort of it was pretty much around this time last year that the price of Bitcoin really started to tick up, and everything else ticks up, and that suddenly draws a lot of interest to the space. And again, what seems to happen with these four year cycles is there's always lots of stuff and people kind of developing things in the background, but the vast majority of people don't really have much interest until there's suddenly an opportunity to make a load of money. And so at the beginning of this year, it definitely seemed like, well, DeFi is one kind of big thing, which is the sort of financial stuff, but then NFTs were also very much just this kind of hot topic. And I think there was kind of very much a worry from some people that it was like, oh, this is just another craze. There's going to be a big boom, and it's going to die down, and we're going to forget about it, and it's going to be like a little speculative bubble, and it'll go away, kind of thing. And it did for a moment. There was, I think, around the sort of peak of the first big boom was the Beeple $69 million Beeple sale, and then it sort of died down a bit, but then kind of around the middle of the year, it picked up again, and there was suddenly a whole bunch more sales, and then it died down again, and then picked up. So it's been really interesting watching these like little mini cycles happen in the NFT space. And the more and more that I've kind of gone into it myself is really just realizing that there's something, and this all remains to be seen. We'll catch up again in 4 years and see what's happening then. But it feels like there's something that's kind of, fundamentally a bit different about NFTs. But looking back at sort of the ICO boom in 2017, a lot of what happened then was just complete and utter garbage and has disappeared. But there's certain things that have stuck around and have kind of almost become like foundational parts of the crypto ecosystem. And so I think we're sort of seeing the same thing with NFTs, where there's definitely a large deal of speculation. And I think a lot of things are going to end up just completely disappearing, probably for the better, some of these things that are going around. But there's definitely something there that, at least to me, feels like it is a really kind of fundamental part of what the internet and technology and the culture is going to be going forward. And I think, we're just really seeing the beginning of that. And much like sort of the internet in the early 90s, we have no idea what it's going to look like in 20 years and what kind of thing people are going to be doing with NFTs and exactly what it's going to mean.
It's a paradigm shift, isn't it? And at the moment we're talking about NFTs, or at least when you talk about NFTs, I'm interpreting that as being art NFTs, art and collectibles, really.
Yeah.
I mean, the technology that is a non-fungible token is so much more than that. And I'm pretty convinced that 5 to 10 years from now, ownership of lots and lots of things will be represented by NFTs.
Yeah, it's really just like digital ownership.
Yeah,
that's what
exactly.
NFTs are, is digital ownership. So
your I don't know, your membership of some club might be represented by an NFT. Your ownership of your house or of some piece of land might be represented by an NFT.
I mean, things that we can't even fathom right now. I mean, if you ask someone in the 90s, like one day you'll be sitting talking to someone on the other side of the world and you'll be able to see them in real time, they would have said like, no one would have had that. I'm sure there were people that had that idea, but like Zoom, people wouldn't have even imagined that Zoom would be a thing 30 years ago.
Even 20 years ago, it was, kind of cutting edge, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I think there's lots of stuff. There's lots of stuff that we probably can think of that'll come about, but even more things that we can't think of, which is really exciting. So
yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that if I've interpreted you correctly, I don't want to put words into your mouth, but a lot of the stuff that's going up at the moment, the kind of NFT projects that are booming and pumping, a lot of them are going to go to zero in the next bear market, right? And that's
there's definitely a lot of stuff that is not going to stand the test of time, and there's a lot that will, and I think there's things like CryptoPunks, Bored Apes, like that sort of the really big stuff is probably going to stick around, but then there's a bunch of kind of random junk that just won't make it, basically.
All of the copycat stuff that you see on every chain, right? That's there on Tezos, that's there on
exactly
Solana and Cardano and wherever you look, right? And on Ethereum, there's plenty of it.
Yeah, well, I think the bear market is always the test. Anyone that can make it through the bear market is something that's probably going to be sticking around for a long time, and well, longer term. And I mean, anything that's sort of made it through the bear market post 2017 and is around now is, kind of much more solid and more foundational kind of thing.
Battle hardened.
Exactly.
Yeah. Without naming like necessarily specific, or you can name specific artists if you want, but I don't feel obliged to.
Sure.
What makes the difference between the stuff that's going to stand the test of time? And also, maybe this is a separate question, up to you if it's a separate question or not. What's the difference between like the kind of NFT collectible projects? So whether that's like, typical drops of 10,000 pieces with different combinations of traits, and then what we might consider as like blockchain fine art. Yeah.
It's interesting because a lot of the people that I talk to who are just sort of the quote unquote layman who doesn't really have much experience with NFTs, when you say NFT to them, all an NFT to them is a PFP 10,000 collectible project. They don't even, like the people that I've had conversations with, I rarely have to like get it in their heads like, no, that's not what an NFT is. There's this digital art and there's all sorts of other things that, I mean, besides the fundamental point that it's just digital ownership. But I think people, and I think that the term NFT doesn't do itself any service because it's kind of a bit of an opaque name for a thing. So people just have this association that NFT is this thing where there's 10,000 of them and the price goes up really high and loads of people make loads of money and it's some kind of Ponzi scheme or whatever it is. And I think that's just something that we kind of have to, we'll deal with, and eventually people will figure out that that's not all that NFTs are. But in terms of your question about sort of what will stand the test of time, I mean, I think there's certain projects that have kind of made it past a threshold, like CryptoPunks, Bored Apes, at least in the sort of collectibles sphere, that have made it so much into the kind of common parlance and into the culture that it seems odd for them to kind of disappear. And so I think a lot of the stuff that is or kind of feels quite cash grabby, and also extending that to visual artists as well, I've definitely seen a lot of people who are coming into the space and as like a visual artist, not as like a PFP collectible kind of thing. And you definitely get the sense that they're just here because they've heard that you could sell a JPEG and make a bunch of money, and they've probably never really done digital art before. Maybe they have, but they're not interested in kind of building something long term. They're very sort of short termism. Whereas there's other artists who, particularly in, and it was a scene I've never really been a part of, but I've managed to meet a lot of people kind of from the glitch scene. And a lot of the artists have been around for years and years making art on Tumblr or Giphy or whatever it is. And they've been doing this anyway, and they're going to keep doing it, whether the NFT market goes up or goes down. And those are the people who are going to really stick around. They're the people that they were doing this before there was a bunch of money being thrown around, and they'll keep doing it even after the money dies down temporarily. Whereas the people who are just here for the money, when the money goes away, they're going to go away as well. And I think the space will be all the better for it.
But it's quite a nice thought. I like the thought when you talk about the guys that have been around for longer, and we could name names, but maybe we don't have to. But guys that have been making like digital art for for a long time, and then they've kind of found, let's say, Hen, for example, as an outlet, um, or foundation or whatever it is. It's nice for those guys to get a payday, right?
Yeah,
I
I
feel
mean,
really nice for them. I feel really happy for
exactly.
them.
I see so many people who you're like, this person really deserves. They've put in so much work that they just kind of never got the reward for, and all the points to them for sticking it out, because that's exactly as I sort of mentioned earlier. My story is the opposite of that. Is I kind of dabbled in the digital art. I was like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to sustain this, and I kind of put it away. And so I do feel a bit like I'm maybe being a bit opportunist, sort of choosing my time to come back in when there's like a financial gain side of it. But now that, so I'm like, I see all these people who've been around doing this when there was no payoff, and I'm like, lots of respect to those people, because I certainly couldn't have done that. Just didn't have the time to be doing that digital art on the side, and not be getting making some kind of living out of it. So yeah, so I think there's loads of people that really sort of deserve all the credit that they're getting.
And then on the buyer's side as well, I guess we're kind of like in this new kind of golden age of art ownership. I don't know about you, but I've bought more art in the last few months than in the rest of my life put together. Like,
Yeah.
because owning physical pieces of art, if you're moving around, if you move, especially, younger people, if you're moving from one flat to another, from one house to another, whatever, from one country to another, uh, owning physical art is an inconvenience, right?
Yeah. Well, somebody messaged me the other day. I bought one of their pieces on Hicket Nunk, and they sent me a message and said, "Hey, like I saw you bought. Well, I think I bought two of their pieces." They're like, "Oh, if you buy these two other pieces as well, I've got this thing where like if you have all of these four, I'll send you a physical piece." And I said to them, I was like, thanks. I really appreciate that. I love your work, but I have no space for a physical piece. I don't want the physical piece. I'm quite happy with just the digital pieces. And the pieces I mentioned earlier, the ones that I'd made for that exhibition way back when, and then kind of have recently reminted on Hicket Nunk, I still have those prints that I made for that exhibition, literally sitting. They're right down below me now, sitting in a folder below my desk, because I don't have space to put them up. And I've carried them around between maybe 3 or 4 different flats and houses that I've been in, and I think I put one up once maybe, but I've just never had anywhere to put them up because I don't have space. But now I'm on Hicket Nunk regularly, like looking through my collection. I'm like, oh, I really like that piece. I feel really good about owning that piece.
Yeah, and you look at it often.
Exactly. And it's this weird thing that I've had to explain. I think it's something that you can't explain to someone. They just have to experience it, because when I've told friends about, like, I've paid all this money for all these JPEGs, and they're like, what are you doing? But there's something, and I was the same before I bought my first NFT. I was like, I don't know about this, whatever, I'll buy a couple. And then I bought a couple, and I was like, oh, okay, I get it. There's just something there. I want to like say it's probably some kind of primal, like, hunter-gatherer desire to collect things, because we had to collect food and whatever to survive. So I think humans just kind of innately have this need to collect things. Like I was big into Pokemon cards and Magic cards. I have always kind of been a collector. And so I think for anyone who's maybe listening to this who hasn't bought their an NFT, is just kind of buy a couple, go on Hicket Nunk and find something that costs like 1 Tezos, and which is just like a couple dollars, and buy a couple pieces. And it's really the only way to just experience the kind of joy of this weird thing that is digital ownership. Even though you can right click and save the JPEG, there's something different about owning it and seeing it all in your Hicket Nunk profile. Here's your collection. I feel like, a sense of pride when I look at it. Like, these are these pieces that I've collected, these artists that I've supported.
The feeling that you've supported the artist, that you've contributed to the community as well.
Exactly. Yeah.
Which I think for me with this podcast idea, that's kind of what I want it to be. I want it to be a contribution to the community, a contribution to the conversation more than anything.
Yeah, I think that's great. I'm really excited to listen into it. I was just going to say, because I know you know, because I've sent it to you, but maybe people who are listening might not know, is this. I've done something similar on my own website. I've got this series that I run called In Process, where it's essentially just artist interviews. It's a lot less in depth than I think the podcast will be, but it's essentially chatting to people about their process and the tools they use, how they make the art that they make. And I started it because that's just something that I'm fascinated with. I'm fascinated with how people do the things they do. But also the idea is hopefully that it is a way to give back to the community, that like maybe a new artist who's just getting started comes in and they read these articles and see how these big name artists, well, hopefully I haven't got any massive, I was really lucky. I got max capacity. I did a piece with Max capacity.
Before he was super famous.
And now he's blown up. So I've got Max. He's the biggest person I've spoken to. But yeah, so new people will come in and see these hopefully really big artists and just kind of be inspired by the way they make their work and by the work, and grow the community, hopefully get more people involved and interested and doing cool stuff.
Yeah, I think there's a need for that. The series is great. For anyone who's watching.
Yeah, well, this is basically going to be the audio version of it. So
sure, that's okay. Let's see if we can get some of the same names in as well.
Yeah.
But it's like a little look behind the scenes, if you like, into people's processes.
Yeah,
it's cool. So we've talked so far. Everything's been quite positive. Mm-hmm. Is there anything that you kind of don't like about the direction that the NFT scene is taking, or the Hicket scene is taking, or is there anything that you would change?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question, because I always like to try and stay positive and kind of view things in a positive light and think, oh well, how is this going to be positive? But I saw a tweet today from Mumu the Stan. If anyone who's been around on the Hicket Twitter hopefully knows Mumu. Because she or they, I'm not sure what they prefer, is quite big in the community. But anyway, they posted a tweet today saying, oh, why is everyone so excited about Coinbase getting into NFTs? Isn't that kind of what we're trying to avoid? These big centralized entities just ruling everything? Because there's all this hype and excitement about now Coinbase has an NFT marketplace, but it's centralized. Like OpenSea is centralized, essentially. It's this one massive kind of company that just controls everything. So yeah, I think one could be really negative and sort of cynical about that and say, well, we're just going to end up with the same thing we had before. But then at the same time, for me personally, the kind of angle I try to take about blockchains in general and cryptocurrency in general is I think there's going to be a lot of aspects of it that will look very similar to existing centralized infrastructure. And that's kind of fine. And that can kind of go on and do its own thing. But the fundamental sort of technology of blockchains still allows for that decentralized community. And so you can have Coinbase and OpenSea, but then you can also still have Hicket. And hopefully the kind of permissionless nature of blockchains means that at any point, anyone can just fire up some tiny little niche community that is completely decentralized and run by the community. And for me, that's always been where the cool stuff happens. I don't use OpenSea because it feels to me like it's just like the Facebook of NFTs. I'm like, ugh, I don't like it at all. Whereas Hicket is more edgy. There's cool stuff. You can find smaller artists. It's just more of a community there. So yeah, so I think one can be cynical about that kind of stuff, about the sort of centralization and I guess just sort of absorption of all of this really interesting stuff just into the traditional infrastructure. But then the positive side is that I think there always will be people on the fringe doing really interesting kind of things. I know your question was there anything I would change? I'd love there to be less 10,000 PFP projects, although I say that completely guilty of doing my own one. But so I guess I don't have any problem with that in particular, but I'd really love when I see a friend I haven't seen in a long time and say, hey, I'm like into NFTs now, and then roll their eyes and go like, oh, so you're like buying avatar pictures, like profile pictures. I'd love that not to be the perception of what NFTs are, which I know will come with time and people will kind of get it eventually. So that's definitely one thing I'd love to change.
I imagine we're probably not that, maybe like one Bitcoin market cycle away from not even talking about NFTs anymore. You'll just say that you're an artist. Maybe you'll say that you're a digital artist, and people will understand that that selling your work as NFTs is just a part of that.
Yeah,
It will just be a
exactly.
normal part of that. I think it probably already is for most people.
Yeah, I think a lot of digital artists who before would maybe like sell prints, or they've just transitioned to the way that they sell their art is via NFTs.
Yeah.
And I think seeing how much benefit those artists have gotten from that, I don't think they're going to be going back to selling merch. It was
Right.
really interesting. This is a bit of a tangent, but a lot of the like criticisms that people will throw at NFTs, because I mean, we can talk about that for days and days. There's all the people who hate on NFTs and crypto because of energy use and blah blah blah. Um, it was a funny thread where someone was basically just kind of like ragging on a Heket Nunk artist, saying, "Oh, you're destroying the planet. Like, why don't you just make merch?" And the person replied and was like, "You know how bad for the environment print-on-demand merch is? Like, printing a because obviously
Make some t-shirts in Bangladesh and ship them halfway around the
yeah,
world.
exactly.
Yeah.
Like, do you know what you've just said? And have you really thought about that? And maybe if you compared it to like Ethereum currently and that sort of energy use there, but saying that to someone who's on Heket Nunk, it's like, nah, well, I'm not sure I
I think
went down
even
that tangent, but it was just an
yeah,
interesting thing.
I think even if you do the calculations for energy usage of Ethereum of NFTs, I think you'd have to run the numbers, but I
Yeah.
mean, I think it doesn't compare
Yeah, like
to
to print on
producing.
demand like a single T-shirt, just the waste and various things that goes into that, I'm sure is not great. So
Is there a specific like technique or technology, or even a specific artist that works in like a really different way that you're excited about for the future?
that is a difficult question to answer because there are so many answers that I could give. There's so many artists that are doing really interesting stuff at the moment. I'm interested, and this is something that I'm interested in exploring a lot more, and I have seen some people doing it, but I've always been interested in the kind of merger of art and technology. So I'm always just completely enamored with the people who do really interesting code art. And even things like I'm seeing more and more now, like on Heket Nunk, where people will mint a piece of art. I think I got airdropped one yesterday, where the art is generated based on your wallet address.
Yeah.
So it's pulling info from the blockchain, and you get this custom piece of art. Um, yeah, I'd love to sort of see more of that, where people are doing. And this one I got yesterday was cool, but it wasn't like, well, maybe it just wasn't my style, but it wasn't like super aesthetically pleasing. But so I think obviously as people maybe experiment with that more and push the boundaries with that, then there'll be interesting stuff happening there. So I'd love to see more of that kind of technological stuff being used in the art. And I'd love to learn personally how to do more of that. So yeah, just keeping an eye on artists who are doing interesting stuff in that space.
Cool. I was chatting just on Twitter the other day to an artist who was working on that kind of thing. It was I can't remember what the piece was exactly because I've seen a couple of things like that recently, but that yeah, used part of your wallet address as a seed to to change the artwork, right?
Mm.
And so I asked them, I sent them a message. I asked them, uh, so then if I buy this like on the secondary market, then it's going to look different in my wallet to how it looks on on the other person's wallet. But then when you're looking at it on secondary or when you're looking at it on Hen, what do you see? Am
Yeah.
I seeing the way it looks in the current owner's wallet or the way it will look in my wallet?
Yeah.
And the answer was that it would, in this case, the way it was done was that it would, that what I see when I look on Hen is how it would look in my wallet. But then the artist, as
Interesting.
a response to that, made they had also made in parallel a program that cycled through all the owners' wallets. I'll find it for you and I'll send you the link to it.
I saw one the other day. Kim, I don't know if you know Kim Asendorf,
I
um,
know the name, but I don't know this piece.
who, I mean, I've been following Kim for a while because he it was like a pretty sort of established kind of glitch art figure.
He's like OG digital
Yeah,
artist, right?
yeah, exactly. OG digital artist. He basically invented the pixel sorting like algorithm. He was one of the first people to do that. Um, but it was a piece that the piece itself was made up of all the names of the owners. So it was like a multi-edition piece, and each owner had like a little dot with their name, and it was a very simple piece, and the dots were just like moving around. But it was kind of cool, just like, oh, okay, well, that's a very simple use of pulling that information from the blockchain, or from whatever Hickett Nunk is using. I have no idea how these things work behind the scenes. But yeah, that's just kind of like an interesting thing that was happening there.
Listen, is there anything else? I think that's been a really good like chat. I think you've
Yeah.
answered everything that I wanted to ask. Is there anything else that you wanted to say, that you wanted to include?
I mean, we could talk about NFTs and crypto stuff for days and days and days, but maybe I'm going to spin it around and I'm going to ask you a question. Because do you make any of your own art, or are you just a collector?
I'm just a fan, collector, dabbler. I mean, I've kind of dabbled a little bit because I'm one of those people that I like to get my hands dirty with things. I find it really difficult to stand on the sidelines and just admire without making something.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, I've kind of like dabbled a little bit in learning some of the tools that maybe some generative artists use. I've kind of learned a little bit about, I play around with like some pixel sorting and like playing with different pixel sorting algorithms and things like that, but really just following tutorials and not with any real artistic spirit. I'm not trying to be an artist, but maybe I am trying to
doing it for fun and playing.
Yeah, trying to understand the technology and understand the tools a little bit.
But so I'm interested then to hear your journey into NFTs and sort of how you heard about it and what got you hooked in the first place. Because obviously for me, I came in, I was like, oh, this is about the art for me and making the art. And there obviously was the kind of collecting aspect to it. But for you, it's sort of entirely the collecting.
Right. So for me, it's much more, it's a really interesting question. How do you end up there if you're not an artist and you're not, I have to say, I'm not particularly chasing like the number go up, like money making thing either. It's an interest in the technology, I think. I know that sounds like a horrible cliche, right?
I mean, that's why I got into Bitcoin in the first place. Is not, well, I heard about it because the first time I heard about Bitcoin, I think, was when it went up from like $10 to $1,000. And then I sort of researched it and I was like, oh, this is really, really interesting. Yeah, so I know what you mean.
Yeah, and I think it's super important to keep up with what's happening, even if it's only like tangential to your everyday life, right? And I think, it almost sounds stupid to say this, but there are many people who are not switched onto it yet, that blockchain-based ledgers are, it sounds so stupid to say they're going to be big. They're already big, but they're going to be even bigger. It's going to be such a big part of our lives. And NFTs are like one key use case of that. And I'm super interested in NFTs, and I'm super interested in NFTs way beyond art. Art is what they're being used for at the moment. I happen to love art and to love digital art, so that's cool. But I'm really interested to see where the whole thing goes.
Just digital, all kinds of digital ownership things.
Digital ownership.
Tickets, I've heard people talking about ticketing, using NFTs for ticketing.
Yeah, but I wonder if that's really necessary, though. Is that really an improvement on the centralized database and QR code that we have at the moment for ticketing? How's it better?
Yeah, that's the thing with a lot of this. And it was definitely a thing in 2017 as well, where it was just like, oh, build a blockchain for it. And it's like, oh, you need this thing, put it on a blockchain. And no, blockchains don't really work for everything. So I think there'll probably be a lot of ideas that people will throw around. I think the interesting thing with ticketing maybe is like kind of the transferability of it. But I suppose because the other thing about NFTs is you buy a piece of art to hold for a long time, presumably. Maybe even to pass on to next generation kind of thing. Whereas a ticket is something you buy and you use. So if you buy a ticket from a centralized entity and a year later that centralized entity goes under, you don't really care because you've used your ticket kind of thing. Whereas if you were to buy a piece of digital art from a centralized entity and they go go away and all their servers get shut down, then you've lost your piece of art.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I guess things that need to have more permanent ownership attached to them. I heard somebody, I read was an article or a podcast or something that I listened to, somebody talking about NFTs as a way to bring physical items into the digital world. So, and I'll probably get this wrong, but the way they kind of described it is like you could take any arbitrary item, like my phone, say, and there could be a QR code engraved in it, which that QR code represents a wallet address, and that is the unique digital identifier of my phone. So I lose my phone and somebody picks it up, they can take the QR code, they can scan it, and on that sort of digital identity is my name and whatever else needs to be on there, or whatever else I want to be on there, to sort of digitally show that I own this physical item, and that could apply to kind of anything. But then also you could do interesting things with bringing that physical item into, it could have some kind of digital manifestation in the metaverse. And then therefore that physical item that you actually own is represented with that digital ownership in the digital world. But yeah, I mean, this seems like an interesting idea to explore.
Yeah, another one that I'm sure we're going to see is car registration.
Yeah.
And different parts of cars as well. There's always a whole thing. It's super mundane compared to like art and music and like all of that good stuff. But with all of like the fake car parts that there are, and these are high value items that sometimes you don't know if you're buying the authentic parts and things like that. I'm sure that's something that's going to end up on a blockchain.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Just like for counterfeiting physical things, you could have a knockoff Gucci bag that you just scan the QR code and you're like, nah, this is a knockoff. It's not authenticated on the Gucci blockchain.
Yeah, but on the other hand, you can just copy a QR code and put it on the fake as well. So like, how do you, it's only ever as good as that link between the physical item and the blockchain. That's the weak link, isn't it?
Yeah, interesting. I think these are all things that are just going to emerge over the next couple of years. And it's like you said, there is this sort of underlying fascination with the technology and just wanting to kind of see what happens. Just purely like an intrigue and an interest of like, oh, where's this going to go? What are people going to do with it? Maybe nothing. Maybe it'll all just fizzle away, but it was fun to be there while it was doing something.
It was fun to be there while it was doing something. I think we'll look back on it fondly, like, and maybe in the same way as people look back on like the punk movement in the 70s and 80s or something like that, right? It'll be like, you tell your grandkids about it, you know? Whatever's left of this 30, 40 years from now.
Yeah.
I don't know. You've been part of it.
Exactly. Yeah, it's just a fun space to be in. So
I agree. Completely agree. Listen, man, thank you very much for your time. It's been a real pleasure.
Such a pleasure. Yeah, I mean, there's so much more that we could talk about, but then we'd have a 5-hour long podcast. So.
Yeah, I think it's good to keep it to, I'll maybe try and edit.